I really wasn't paying attention.
There you go. There's our intro for this one. Josh.
Secrets of being a
How
husband.
stupid people are successful. Josh stopped paying attention and he keeps getting lucky.
Well, this is How Stupid People Succeed. I'm Josh, and this is Jeremy. Make sure you like us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and especially on Facebook.
Share, comment, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Tag somebody.
Yeah. Tag someone. You have to.
Bring it home.
Why
Bring it
not?
home. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about culture.
Yeah.
Culture. What kind, so when you evaluate, when you walk into a situation, do you even realize, first of all, that you're a culture producer? Like, do you have that kind of thought turned on or that accountability to yourself?
I think you have to.
If you just had to guess, these aren't scientific numbers, percentage of people that blame their culture or on the flip side, actively realize they have an accountability to their culture. Does that make sense? So like, oh, my work culture sucks. Not realizing all the negativity they bring to it is just promoting that culture instead of realizing they have an impact they can play in that culture.
I would say it's probably pretty close to 50-50, I would imagine. Like I'm thinking about my wife's work right now. So they have a pretty good team, but there are a few which which she tells me that is obviously kind of like the Debbie Downers of the group, and and they're the ones that complain about the culture and all the negativity. And it's one thing that I learned personally a long time ago is if I'm going to focus on the negative, all I'm going to bring is negative.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's one of the reasons why I don't watch the news is because I want to focus on the positive and I want to bring out the positive. I want to be uplifting and I want to keep going forward. It's just I can't. If I'm focused on the problem, I can't find time for the solution.
Yeah.
And that's simply how I just operate life. Sometimes to a detriment, but it's, to me, life's worked out far better that way. In my short, 30 some years of life.
So when you're in a situation or new to a team or something like that, what do you feel like you bring to the culture of, maybe even that conversation or that team or that group or that moment?
A lot of times it can be just perspective, so you're bringing a different perspective, but, I kind of think about it sometimes as the whole, are you the thermometer in the room or are you the thermostat? So everything that, I know that I am a leader in most areas of life. And so in those areas, creating that atmosphere and creating that culture and being an example of the culture that I want everybody else to have is important.
Yeah.
And when I don't do that and I kind of take a back seat, obviously kind of knowing my role in a lot of those places, but a lot of it can be is, the leader's heart and the culture that they want to create. So just be an example of that culture and try to live out that culture with, and try to, really try to paint that picture of the culture that leader wants to portray. So understanding that culture on where it is now, where they want it to be or where I want it to be is really important. So you have to be able to sit back a little bit and realize you have to grasp what's going on in the world,
right?
Or at least in that little group or whatever, and be able to act accordingly.
Why do you think it is that we're so sensitive to almost immediately be able to feel the culture of a team, a group, a company, an environment? Even if you're just walking in and you're a patron at a business, you're just spending money, you can still get a sense of what's the culture here, right? Why do you think we're just so naturally bent to be sensitive to that?
That's a great question, man. I don't really know. What do you think?
Well, I would say this. The culture that somebody provides is a lot like their, not to be too weird, but like their personal body odor, right? So you can become used to it, you can become aware of it, and then lose the sense of recognizing it, which I feel like a lot of people are there in their contribution to their local culture. So very few of us have an extensive impact on culture, like, some type of figure, some type of athlete, some type of, significant business leader. Most of us function within much smaller tribal cultures, family, small group setting, small team setting at work, a nonprofit organization, a church, whatever it is, small groups, less than, let's say, 1,000 people. And within those small groups, I think most people lose the sense of, here's my smell, but nobody else does. Everybody can smell them before they smell them, whether it's good or bad. Right? So have you ever gone up to somebody like, man, you smell great. Oh, well, and they always smell great. They probably are just in the same ritual of, this is the dryer sheet I use. This is the detergent I use. This is the cologne I use. This is the deodorant I use. This is the soap I use. And all that contributes to that smell. Same thing on the flip side of culture. Man, I love being around that person. Man, I love having them on the team. Man, I love when they have something to say. And then on the other side, the BO side is like, everything you do kind of stinks. And I don't want to be around them. And I really don't like them being on the team. And it's also interesting when you think about, let's say you walk into even somewhere of the same business, right? So like your Piata experience. You can walk into a Piata over here, which for those people that don't know, it's like an Italian Chipotle.
So good.
But yeah, it's very good. But you can walk into this Piata and walk in and almost immediately know, like, this is going to be good. Or walk in and almost immediately know, like, oh, this is going to be bad. So much so that even ordering pizza, very simple example, I can get a feel for the culture of that place just by when you walk in and you order or something like that. And I know how I need to act towards them based on a crappy culture is going to warrant worse service and a worse product. And I think we don't take enough personal accountability to be, if I am in a crappy culture, then I'm going to be the anomaly. And I think we're so sensitive to it, almost from this, like, it's got to be some kind of like caveman instinct of constantly trying to evaluate, are they for me or are they against me? In a bad culture, isolation becomes very easy, or smaller sects become very easy. In a positive culture, even with the cliques that may exist, there's still this unified group kind of like camaraderie. Right? Or even though I see different from you, we still connect at this point and we're gung-ho. We're all in. Where in a negative culture, you can have two people that even see completely eye to eye, but because it's a negative culture, now there may be an unhealthy level of competition or politicizing relationships or marginalizing time and reward or whatever that may be. So I think culture is something that you have to be sensitive to, you have to be aware of, but you also have to constantly challenge your own personal accountability. So church is a great example of this, right? We both spent an extensive amount of time in church, helping out at church, doing all that stuff.
I definitely thought you were going to start talking about the Browns.
No, Browns obviously, but yeah, that Browns is probably a worse example than church, but an easier example. But church is such a great example where people would just put the culture of the whole thing on, like, let's say the pastor, which, like, that's super unfair.
Yeah.
Like, the culture of this whole group of hundreds of people is on me, right? Even from a business standpoint, or a company standpoint, the whole culture of this business is on me, and I interact with 10 employees or 10 people within this thing on a consistent basis, and the rest of everybody is pretty extended, pretty far away, right? If you're in a 1,000-person company, the vast majority of those people never interact directly with the CEO on any kind of like business-to-business interaction. So it's like, what is the culture there? And then what part can you play in the culture? Because I've also walked into those moments where I'm like, ooh, this is kind of crappy culture. And either one, I'm going to like surrender my accountability, like it's not my fault and it's not my responsibility, or I'm going to start accepting the accountability of, but what can I bring? What can I do?
Yeah.
Not just, can I just isolate myself and just do my thing, which is horrible.
Yeah.
But how do I invest and influence to then build that culture? So in those moments where you realize, ooh, and you have a natural benefit to that because you're naturally likable and relational, right? It's very easy for you to build relationships with people. It's very easy for people to like you.
If you say so.
I do say so. This is Josh Cooper, and I support his message. But for you, how do you look at that and go, okay, a change needs to happen. What can I do to bring that, or what can I do to help that?
And what's
bad culture? Bad culture.
Well, first, if it's a bad culture, I've got to decide if I want to buy in.
Yeah.
So if I want to buy into the leader's vision of what they want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And like one thing I think about is in a successful organization, you have that one main leader that is creating that vision, creating that culture, but you also have people underneath or part of that team that is going to buy into that culture, and hopefully it just kind of seeps through, and everybody else in the organization kind of gets the whole feel of that culture. So when you have that, obviously that's a lot better, but then you see a lot of that bad cultures happen when you see a lot of those that, like, the team surrounding the leaders doesn't buy into that particular culture. They want, the modifications of the culture to maybe look a little bit like this or a little bit like this.
Yeah, manipulators in the culture.
Yeah. So when you have those manipulators in the culture, that becomes very toxic, and it's hard for the organization to see growth, whether it's a business, whether it's a church, or whatever. When you have, for the sake of argument, I'll just say backstabbers. Like when you have the backstabbers in the midst of a culture that you're trying to create and sustain, it's super, super, super difficult. I would say, if not impossible, to be able to create a healthy culture, because you can have a bad culture, you can have a good culture, but if it's not a healthy culture, a bad culture can go a long way to stymie a lot of growth.
Yes. So just to create some common ground, just use some verbs or something to describe what is bad culture.
Oof.
And isn't it funny? It's way more of a feel than we really even associate. Like, oh, here's the top 10, things of a bad. So how would you describe bad culture?
Infighting. It's a great question. It is definitely more of a feel than it is anything.
Yeah. Because even if you think about it, the Piatas, or, I have friends that work in the exact same, industries, but their company feel and how they respond to that is completely different. I have friends that have changed jobs and taken significant pay cuts just to be in a better culture, So, and all of it really is mostly a feel.
Yeah.
But it's funny how sensitive we are to that and how fast we can recognize. And it's almost inarguable too. I don't think you and I have ever been in a bad culture situation, or even like at a business, or, out to eat or something like that, and we have something to say and it's like we disagree. It's almost one of the most universal things ever. And I think one of the big challenges when I've seen bad culture, to your point, you have to be super bought in, because either one, you're going to be super bought in and you're going to do what it takes to hold yourself accountable. Or if you are the leader, you're going to do what it takes to have some really hard conversations and figure it out. And that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
That's typically at minimum a year-long process. And I've been on plenty of teams where I've jumped into something and there was an established culture and I personally didn't like it. So then I began to kind of shift it and try to change it. And that is a big ship that takes a long time to move. And a lot of times what only helps you is being very honest about who's contributing and who's taking away. Right. So the infighting is typically revolves around the same people. So Brittany's telling me a story about somebody that she used to work with, and this person had this reputation for basically infighting. And it was only a matter of time until she had her issue with Brittany. But with Brittany's had enough career exposure. It's like bad culture just doesn't faze her. She can understand it. So part of her job going in and out of all these different schools around the country was, I have to assess the culture of what's happening extremely quickly, because I have to be able to assess and make changes within a consulting time frame. I don't have the luxury of being here for 2 years day to day and turn this whole thing around. And so in hearing some of those stories, it's funny that a bad culture agent can almost never provide enough positive to overcompensate the bad culture. And I think it's one of the lessons I've had to learn recently is almost like if they're contributing bad culture, then you got to eradicate it. You have to So if you're in a position to where you're leading it, you obviously need to have that really hard come to Jesus meeting or figure out a way to squeeze out the bad culture if they're not willing to move and change. If you're in the middle, if you're like stuck and you're not the person defining the culture, then you almost have to create your own like cultural air bubble where, okay, that's fine. But if it falls within my realm, here's the culture it's going to fit into. But again, to your point, the buy-in is super challenging because if you're being led by, let's say, a cultural manipulator, right? So you're seeing somebody that has a vision and it's filtering down through somebody that now is a cultural manipulator. What do you do? And I'm asking you, what do you what do you do in that situation?
I mean, you have to decide if it's something you want to be a part of. You know, is the greater good worth the fight, the blood, sweat, tears, and the energy?
Yeah.
To help kind of change that culture. But if that's the culture the leader's trying to set, is it even worth having that battle?
Yeah. And it's also interesting. So I've been in situations, and I don't want to call anybody out or anything, but there's also plenty of situations I know where bad culture has taken an A+ player and they shift down to a B/C player to bide their time to then get out of that negative culture.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're any kind of responsible human being, one, that's a tough thing to do. So I'm not saying it's not, but however, we shouldn't give ourselves the allowance to do that. So if you're an A+ player, be an A+ player no matter what. Don't let anybody take that away from you because you're always interviewing in a sense. You're always auditioning in a sense. But on the flip side, if you're a person on that team or if you're a leader in that environment, just because you should care about people, address that shift because you see it all the time, right? And what's funny is long after you leave a scenario, what has come back around to me in some of the relationships I had or the places that like I used to work or whatever, the culture impact I had was one of the things that was the most talked about me. It wasn't what I did. It wasn't the numbers. It wasn't, any of that stuff. It was what comes back to me consistently is really the cultural dynamic that changed of, well, when you were here, this is the way it was. And now you're not here and this is the way it is. It's never, oh, well, you hit that sales goal. You got that award or you did that thing or any of that, or you hit that number, whatever. It was like, that's hardly ever come back to me. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the cultural significance. So for you in navigating where you're at, where you're building a team, right? You're growing. How do you ensure, or how do you maintain the intent to know, here's the culture I want these people to experience when they're working with me?
It really comes down to just leading by example, honestly. So just demonstrate the culture that I want. And hopefully the people that I have surrounding myself on the team at least has a very decent glimpse of that culture that I'm trying to create, and they're bought in. Because it's very easy to tell when they're not bought in. Yeah. And then if they're not bought in, that helps me kind of think about, okay, what am I doing that could be disrupting the culture that I'm trying to instill in the team.
Yeah. And you have cultural enforcers, both bad and good.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position to be a significant influence, you're always a cultural influence no matter what. But if you're in a position to be a significant influence, you better assess who's a bad culture enforcer. So the person that does nothing but just promote the bad culture, and you better identify who's a positive cultural enforcer. Because again, we've experienced it where when that good culture is going and you got people bought in, you don't have to address half the issues you have to address. Why? Somebody else is already addressing the culture. We've been on good teams before. Yeah. And you better believe every great team has great culture. Mm-hmm. And half of it is, no, you're not going to do it that way. You're going to do it this way because we're a great team. This is part of the great culture. You're violating me. You're violating them. You're violating people that came before you, people that are coming after you, and you're not going to do that. And there's a lot of confrontation in that.
Yeah.
That's not easy on both sides. Very tough.
So before we wrap up here, Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, bad culture.
Bad culture. So who
Keep finding bad culture people too.
So who is one bad culture person and one good culture person? I think we can agree.
On the Brown, Jarvis Landry, hands down, is the most incredible. He's one of the most incredible cultural athletes I've ever seen. Yeah. What he brings to a team and what he does is absolutely remarkable.
So in 2019, who was the bad cultural person?
Bad culture? I mean, you can point the finger at Odell, but I don't even think it was really Odell because he was truly struggling. So I mean, you got to look at Baker. I mean, he's the cultural enforcer for the whole team. He's the guy with the voice. And that's the other side. Is if you want to be the guy with the voice, then you're also the guy with the accountability. And if you want to be the guy with the paycheck, you're going to be the guy with the accountability. Don't complain about the seat you're sitting in.
What happens in Westlake stays in Westlake.
Not true.
Yeah.
Twitter and Snapchat are real, people.
That's true. Well, this is How Stupid People Succeed. I'm Josh. This is Jeremy. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like us on Apple. Subscribe to us on our podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook. Make sure you like, comment, and share. And leave us your thoughts in the comments.
Yep.